Hi there, welcome to Business Leadership Podcast. In this podcast, I interview successful business leaders and industry experts to help you grow your business. I truly believe that sometimes single insight can completely change your business directions and allow you to achieve your business goals. In this episode, my guest is a keynote speaker. She's a consultant and she's also a corporate trainer. She's also an attorney with 20 years of experience, and she's the author of a best-selling Negotiate It, How to Crush Your Fears, Develop Negotiating Muscle, and Gain a Power at a Workplace. Now, during our discussion, we talk about a variety of important topics around business and leadership. Lynn walks us through how negotiating skill set is not only important for business leaders or for sales department, it applies to every single role in the company. She shared her unique approach of 3 R's and how business leaders can develop a skill set using a unique approach, and also how business leaders can not only develop a skill set for themselves, but also how they can teach and build their teams as well, and teach them how to build better negotiating skills. So if you like these videos, don't forget to subscribe to this YouTube channel. Until next time, please welcome my guest, Lynn Price. Hi, Lynn. Welcome to podcast. Your book, Negotiate It, How to Crush Your Fears, Develop Your Negotiation Muscle, and Gain Power in the Workplace. Very interesting topic, and I'm looking forward to, this is a skill set is important not only for business leaders, everybody in a company, and it's such a hard skill set to develop. So I'm looking forward to a discussion. Thank you so much for time today.
Yeah, happy to be here.
Good. Every time we talk about negotiating, why does this have some sort of negative tone to it, where it should be such a positive thing that two parties trying to work together and figure out what the common grounds are?
Yeah, I think the thing that I see the most when I coach people on this is that there's such a fear surrounding this topic. And I think that's because I say negotiate and they hear conflict and confrontation. Like that's what they're thinking that negotiation is, that there's always gonna be a conflict. I'm always gonna be battling someone. And it just doesn't have to be the case. Sometimes if you just reframe the topic, that's enough to get them past the fear. So instead of, if I have to call you and negotiate something, instead of saying, oh, I need to call you and negotiate, and if I reframe it and think, okay, I need to call you and explain to you what I can and can't do, right? Have a discussion with you. That can just take the pressure down just a couple notches to where people feel a little more comfortable because they know their subject matter. It's just mentally getting past this barrier of like, oh, it's going to be a conflict, and it doesn't have to be. And even if you engage in a conflict, it doesn't have to be aggressive. You can have different positions and work through them. It doesn't have to be, a very dramatic confrontation.
Where's the fear coming from? Is it somebody gonna lose in this discussion? Either I'm gonna lose or somebody else gonna. Is that where the fear is coming from? I don't want to lose anything, or somebody else gonna lose.
Yeah, I think that's certainly a fear that I'm going to be taken advantage of, or I'm not going to get the deal that I need to get. I think also there's a lot of imposter syndrome surrounding this topic. It's that feeling of, well, who am I to ask? I shouldn't even be asking. Why would they listen to me? What basis do I have to ask for a change? Sometimes that gets in people's heads, but certainly, yeah, this idea that it's all or nothing. And in business, there's a whole gray area. It's not, very rarely is it, this one single thing I have to get, and then the rest of it doesn't matter. Normally it's like a whole priority list of things that you need to get, and there's an ebb and flow to it. So it's not just a, life or death. I'm sure if you've seen this topic at all, you see a lot of the top authors and people in this category are hostage negotiators. And it's great because, first of all, how cool when you go to a party and you get to say that's your job. Like that's just inherently cool. You see on movies and TV, it just looks cool and great. Now with them though, it's a black and white. At the end of the day, you either got them out alive or you didn't. It's very clear cut. But in business, there's so much gray area. So I think when people they inherently think that it's just I get it or I don't. But there's a lot of wiggle room. There's a lot of creative problem solving and creating common ground that if you just approach it that way, and if you keep working at it, you can get a very good deal and you can hit all your markers for it to be a success, but it's just not as cut and dry as people tend to think it is.
Yeah, over the years, especially in a business discussions, when the topic of, negotiating, something comes up, people get so stressed out. I've seen very, very, leaders with a lot of experience, they still get stressed out. It's simply, whether it's a preparation or it's just a fear, as you mentioned, or simply just a stress around that, and a financial stress, right? So, but I see a lot of people get stressed out, but, definitely, it should be such a positive approach that, let's figure out where's the common ground. We're going to work together and figure out what works for you and works for us. And we can have a common ground. But I see people with even many, many years experience, they get so stressed out, it simply just looks like the skills not developed yet.
Yeah. And I think part of it too is that, I've gone through a lot of school, I went to, law school, all this schooling. And I don't think I've ever really even had a formal class on here's how you negotiate. It's something that people just assume that you know how to do. And unless you've been paying attention to people around you, or if you've spent time studying the topic, you might not feel as grounded in that skill set as you do in other ones. So sometimes, you get to a higher level and you're expected to negotiate and you're like, oh, I don't really feel confident in the skill.
Yeah.
But it's very easy to learn. It's not, I'm very cautious of people when they say, oh, I'm a born negotiator. I'm like, oh, okay. What you probably are is you probably were born into an environment where people are negotiating around you and you absorbed and you paid attention, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you can do that. And that's not something that you have to learn early. You can learn it at any stage. And then that's, kind of why I wrote the book and came up with the formulas. It's something that's very easy to remember, quick to apply, so you can apply it immediately. You don't have to think about a college level, lecture on, the detailed analysis. Like, these is very quick things you can put into actions to improve immediately.
Mm-hmm. So it's a skill set that you develop over the year, right? They're definitely in the formula helps, memorizing all the items that are required to help. But as you mentioned in the book, it takes a lot of practice to build a skill set, I guess, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's one of those things too. The more you do it, the easier it gets, because initially you will have some fear surrounding that, but once you realize that you ask the question, so I have the slogan, like, don't ask, don't get. So once you start making the ask, you realize, like, very few times are people going to go what I call howler monkey crazy on you and like freak out. Most of the time they'll just say, no, can't do that. And that's fine. And once you get used to saying, okay, I'll ask, and then you start seeing wins, then your confidence increases dramatically. And then that is a superpower in negotiation, because once you feel confident, people can feel that, and you're going to confidently ask for what you want, knowing that the answer might be yes, it might be no, but you're going to be okay either way. And that brings a different demeanor to the negotiation. But you get that confidence by practicing. And so that's why I advocate practicing in low risk situations. I don't want you to practice for the first time,
Mm-hmm.
get a new job and you're negotiating your salary. You want to build that muscle before you get to that point. So it's on, small, areas. When you start to look around in your day-to-day life, you will start to see opportunities for you to make the ask. And I always tell people that when you hear in your mentally, when you hear I wonder if they would, ... whatever it is, I wonder if they would do whatever, that's your ticket. That's free. That's your don't ask, don't get bell that goes off.
Got you.
Make the ask. If you think, I wonder if they would do something, ask. Just go ahead and ask.
So simply just asking. So do you write it down? Like, I wonder if they do something, and do you write it down and simply say, okay, if that's what I want, I'm just going to ask for it. Is that part of preparation, or simply just during the discussion, if that comes out, wonder if they do, and then you just simply ask for it?
Yeah, that's a good question. It depends on the scenario. If I have time in advance, of course, I want to write down, like, what is my ask? What's it going to be? How am I going to support that? That's the be ready of the formula of the 3 R's. That's the first one, being ready and being prepared. So the more details I can get to explain the why of why I'm asking, the situation I'm going to be in, because it's very easy for people to say no when they just hear the question, like, no. But if they hear the why behind it, that will kind of make sense to them, or they'll know why they can't do it. And there's more of a discussion there when you start with making the ask and then explaining the why behind it. You're going to position, to start a negotiation, start a discussion, right? Because again, that's all it is. It's a discussion, a back and forth. So, but there are times that you will be in an environment where you don't have the time to really do a full preparation. So and when your mind thinks, oh, I wonder if they would do this, if you're checking out, or you're closing a deal at the last minute and you're like, oh, I just remembered this. What about this? Just make the ask, Again, the worst that they're going to do is say no. This isn't hostage negotiation in business. They're going to say no. And if you put in, again, the second R in my formula is to be relatable, to to connect with people in an authentic, quick way.
Mm-hmm.
So if you've already done that, you've established that, and then you make the ask, it's not going to be seen as abrasive or confrontational. It's going to be like, oh, okay, we already have this basis of this relationship so far, and now he's making additional asks. So I'm going to, most likely, I'm going to listen to him, and again, either I'm going to agree, disagree, or make a counter offer.
I see. You're just building upon what's already talked about, right? You're just making it relatable, and you're just building on top of that, right?
Right.
Wow, very interesting. So yeah, this skill set usually just seen as a part of the sales, positions, but as you outlined, it's part of every role in a company. I guess everybody's got to learn the skill set, right?
Everything. I mean, my background, I was in legal. I was in-house legal department, managed the legal department for national engineering firm, and I negotiated all the time. And part of it would be contracts and terms and that thing. But being in a corporate headquarters, it was negotiating for funding. It was negotiating for all sorts of resources, and when I could hire people and things that I could do, or pushing an initiative uphill to get buy-in. That's a negotiation, and getting and working with people to get buy-in, and almost lobbying on behalf of your project or your initiative. That's all negotiation. And it's throughout your whole day. It's what you're going to do for dinner tonight with your significant other. I mean, it's really, when you start paying attention to it, it's overwhelming how many opportunities you have to negotiate throughout the day. But it's definitely not just sales. Obviously, it's the most visual when they do it, but it's in every department and every level. I mean, from entry all the way up to the CEO, everyone has opportunities to negotiate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. It's part of your daily life. You got to go through it, and definitely, you got to prepare. So what do you see people get stuck, some of those skill set when they're building a skill set, or they're learning how to be better at it? Where do you think they get stuck? And, what do you think, is the time or effort, or simply just not knowing what they're getting into?
I think sometimes they stay in their head too much. So they will think, I wonder if they would do this, or I wish they would do that. I would like to ask for XYZ. And then they think, well, no, they just say no. They stay in their head. They negotiate against themselves in their own head.
Yeah, you're negotiating in your head with yourself instead of talking to people.
Exactly. So there are a couple of ways that you can negotiate against yourself. One of them is just mentally. So you convince yourself you won't make the ask at all. That's terrible, because you're never, you always lose that one. When you don't, you're not asking, you 100% will not get. When you ask, there's a good chance that you're going to get it. You never know how it's going to go. It depends on the situation. The other thing I see people doing, and this is very common when you're new at it, and again, it's negotiating and it's yourself, is if you think of just the basic rules of contract law, so if I'll make an offer, say I'm buying a car, the sticker price is the offer. Now, if I say, hey, would you take 8,000 less? That's a counter offer. Now they can either accept, they can, say no, absolutely not, or they can make a counter offer, and you go back and forth until you find that. So what I see people do is that they will make their offer or their counter offer. So say, oh, would you take $5,000 less? Well, and you got to be comfortable with silence on this. You got to give people a minute to think about it and respond. So let's say, what would you take 5,000? And they wait a nanosecond and they haven't heard anything immediately. And they're so insecure. They think, well, but like 4,000 would be okay. Well, but 3 would be great. I mean, whatever you can do. They just immediately change their stance. You've got to give people an opportunity to respond and not negotiate against yourself. That's very, very when you're starting.
Yeah, very interesting, especially, pausing and waiting for the feedback. I think that's very critical skills. We see that all the time, right? So people get so stressed and they just want to respond to that right away. Maybe a little pause in between and give yourself a little room to think about it, and let it process. So then you can have a different approach to it.
Exactly. And just being comfortable with silence, especially if you're an extrovert or you're used to interacting with people, when you go into a negotiation, you got to remind yourself, like, I'm going to have to be quiet, and give them that opportunity. And it might be uncomfortable for you. It might be uncomfortable for them, but you got to give them that moment to process and to consider what you asked, then to respond to you. And it can get awkward. You can hear crickets there. And then instead of changing your position, then if you get really uncomfortable after a while, then you can say, what do you think? Or what are your thoughts? Prompt them to respond without changing your position. That's what I want you to stay away from. Just don't change your position if they haven't said no or if they haven't countered. Just don't negotiate against yourself.
Very interesting. And when you're negotiating, it doesn't have to be money all the time, right? It sometimes could be something, could be something else. Sometimes could be time. Sometimes could be a resource. It could be a variety of different things that you could use to negotiate.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've negotiated for all sorts of things. I mean, dogs, furniture, all sorts of things. It doesn't have to be just money. And again, that's when you hear that internal dialogue, like, oh, I wonder if they would include this in this transaction, or I wonder if they would agree to letting me do XYZ. That's your mental trigger to say, okay, I need to make the ask.
Wow, very interesting. So how can somebody develop the skill set? Definitely you mentioned the practicing, with somebody that will help. And so if somebody wants to go on a journey, where do they start and how do they go about building the skill set, if they want to go on this journey?
So the first thing, again, that I would recommend is just listening for that mental trigger. I wonder if they would, or whatever you're saying that's equivalent to that. And then just practicing making the ask. One thing that I advocate, especially now, the last several years, I think a lot of us are doing more online shopping than we used to. Certainly up. So I recommend people, because again, I want low stakes. I just want you to get in the practice of making the ask. It doesn't matter if you get the win or not. It's just breaking that barrier to make the ask on your behalf. So if you're buying something online and you're checking out, and then there's a coupon code there.
Yeah.
And so instead of, you could go to Google, you could put the company name in, you could try to search it that way, but I don't want you to do that because I want you to practice making the ask. So instead, see if there's a chat function, or old school, like call them and say, hey, I'm about to make a purchase. I'm a new customer. I'm a returning customer, whatever the case is, just be honest with them, tell them. So I see that there's a coupon code. Do you have one that I can use? Right? You're making the ask, you're practicing asking. And I would say 90% of the time they will give you one. And it's not about the 10% off, 20% off. Once I got 50% off my purchase just by asking, it's not about that. It's just getting in the habit of vocalizing your ask. So that's an easy one, is online shopping. Just throughout your day, really, when you pay attention, you will, and when you want to develop the skill, you'll be shocked at the opportunities that come around you all day long. Just for you to raise your hand and say, hey, would you do this? Can you do this? Can we agree, that we want to proceed this way? You'll see it all around you. I have no doubt.
Very interesting. So how about working remotely? A lot of business leaders, they have the teams working remotely. Let's talk about corporate world a little bit. You have a lot of experience, many years experience in that area. So when they negotiating something on in a person is different energy. You're sitting in front of somebody and you can negotiate in a boardroom. That's a different skill set. Now you're trying to do that on a digitally, with this Zoom or team meetings. Does that skill set changes a little bit? Do they have to change their approach, or what changes in this area?
Yeah, I think on that, you're right. It is different than when we're working face to face and when you're in an office with someone, it does change. So on that, I want to put you in a position where it's easy for you to say yes. So when that means, if we're working remotely, if I pay attention to, if we're emailing back and forth, like, do you respond quicker when it's a short email with lots of bullets, or do you want the full description, and then that gets a quicker response? I'm going to pay attention to what you're responding to. And then I'm going to try to tailor my approach to whatever like format that you tend to want and that you are most responsive to. So like if I was in an office, I had someone that was delight to work with, but he hated with a passion when people would drop into his office. Hated it. Yeah. You could tell that, just by the way he would react. So I never did a drop by. I'd always send an email, or I would, formally give him something, and I got much better responses from that. So when you're working remotely, do people like the direct messaging function, or do they hate it? Do they see it as a distraction? Do they prefer, again, the longer email text, or do a short email with an attachment with all the details? Pay attention to what is getting a response. And what I used to do myself, and then also used to train my folks to do, is I was corporate secretary. So I'd sit in the boardroom in these very high functioning teams. And it was so funny because, you'd see, inevitably, we all do it, right? You'd see the look down, the checking emails, the swiping. And so I learned just by watching them is that I had a 2-swipe rule, or 1 swipe rule. So if I needed to get a response out of you, I need to make it very clear at the executive level, be very clear on what I was asking for. And it could be one swipe, because if it required more than one swipe, it's not that they don't want to respond. They just don't have the capacity in their day-to-day if they're in a meeting. So just do a one swipe. It makes it easier. And then if you can state it at the end, is it okay to proceed? Some sort of statement that they could just say, yes, okay, go for it. An easy, quick response. And you're making it a situation it's easy for them to say yes. You're setting them up for success.
So you design your question in such a way that they can just respond with either number or yes or no, just one word, instead of they have to type the whole thing. Exactly.
And in being in legal, that's not always easy, right? Because you have to give them a lot of information. So sometimes it'd be like, all the details are on the attachment. To learn more, please see the attachment. But if it was something that they didn't need to do a deep dive on, give them in a real short format. So it's just an easy way for them to respond to you, because then that's going to get the win. Because again, it's not that they don't want to respond. They're just being bombarded with things. So the person that makes it the easiest to get a quick response is going to get the quick response.
So yeah, that's definitely a good insights. You just make it very, very simple, break it down, whether type of one number or something, or one word, and just finish it. And you get that way you get, if they want to see a details, you are going to attach the details to it, but at least they can decide, and very often they can make a decision right, just looking at the lot of information there, right?
Yeah. Never underestimate the power of bullet points. You can just, to highlight, like, these are the three things we considered, how would you like to proceed? Your yes, no, again, just making it easy for them to respond.
Yeah, I'm looking at my inbox. I'm always responding to smallest emails, with a couple of lines. Those were faster get the response than the longer one. Longer one is usually queue them. Okay, end of the day or tomorrow morning, I'll go through them and I'll take a look at that. But the quick ones, you want to deal with them right away.
Yep. See?
Okay. Interesting. So how about, not only business leaders, not only they have to learn the skill set, they also got to teach the skill set of negotiating to the teams as well. Where do they start? How do they teach their teams get better at it? Or is their own journey? How do they go about it, building a culture of negotiating with each other?
Well, I think the first thing whenever you're building a culture is to make sure that they feel comfortable if they fail. Don't set up the culture, be like, I want you to negotiate this, and if you don't get it, you're in trouble. Right? You want to start them on projects or contracts or whatever it is, where there's some wiggle room. Like, if they don't get it, it's going to be okay. So let them build that muscle and get prepared in practice. Right. But obviously, what I state in the book, it's just, I had the formula of 3 R's, because again, I've reviewed over 11,000 contracts, from very short to crazy long federal contracts, general contractors all across the board. But when you do that, you can't do that volume without seeing some patterns emerge. And so that's why I created the formula. So, and that's how I taught my people. And that is to be, the first one is the formula 3 R's. So the first one is to be ready. So that's your preparation phase. So know your subject matter backwards and forwards, like know what you want out of this interaction for it to be a good deal. You need to know, okay, if I don't get these 3 things, it's no longer a good deal for me. So I need to walk. You need to know what the 4 corners, that you're going to negotiate. Like, what are those going to be? Because you don't want to make a bad deal just because you're negotiating. Think, well, I have to get something, and so I'll take it. No, you need to know exactly what you want from the deal. So you need to know your subject matter. Then the second one is to be relatable. Because again, people help people that they like. It's just true, right? And so I'm not advocating like being a fake, like, hey, like me. It's not that. It's like finding an authentic way to connect with someone. And like you mentioned on working remotely, and that's kind of what I'm doing, is I'm paying attention to your style and what you're responding to, and I'm going to, present myself in a way that you're going to respond positively to. So that's being authentic and creating a connection and being relatable. If you have the luxury of doing that. Sometimes if it's a cold negotiation and you're just starting with someone, it can be things like just being responsive. People like people, when you send an email and someone responds quickly, you immediately you have a little positive check mark next to their name, because you're taken seriously. They've given you your time, they aren't delaying things. So there are a lot of little things you can do to just make yourself relatable. And then finally, is it being reasonable? And when I say being reasonable, I'm not saying be a doormat. I'm no position am I saying ever be a doormat, but because it's business, there's so much gray area. So it's get creative. If we're negotiating a contract, a sales agreement, if you're purchasing equipment from me, whatever it is, like, you want to work with me, I want to work with you.
Yeah.
So always keep that front of mind. Like, we want to make a deal. This doesn't have to be a crazy confrontational interaction. So get creative. Like, what can I do that's going to, make you comfortable in this transaction? And what can I get out of you that's going to make a better transaction for me? So it's just being really creative and open-minded to find an agreement, really.
Wow, very interesting. So how about in a corporate world, Lynn? Whether we buy new software, whether we buy new hardware, there's so many contracts. Online service agreement comes in our inbox. And a lot of people just simply, don't read a lot of. There's so many fine prints that you have to go through in order to understand the language of it and what's behind it. And then you have to agree. And a lot of small, medium businesses, they don't have an attorney to go through all it. So they just simply checkbox without even looking at it. So where you see some of that, do they have to go through read by line every contract out there? And large company, they're getting a contract. They may not have a room to change anything for them, right? So small companies where you work in one-on-one, you can negotiate. But large company, as it is, the template comes in, you simply sign it. What are your thoughts on dealing with those electronic signatures and contract agreements?
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And sometimes, and that's part of your being ready stage, is to research and to figure out, like, is there going to be some wiggle room? Is there not? Say even when you're working with larger corporations, you don't accept no, that we're not going to negotiate anything until that comes from a true decision maker. Because most companies, there is some wiggle room on some things. It might not be as much as you negotiate on one that's a smaller company, but there typically is some room. And if you focus on, and if you build that relatable skill, with your cohort, that they might be more willing to help you navigate that and find it. But sometimes it's not, sometimes it is what it is. Sometimes they are at a position of authority. Sometimes they aren't going to negotiate at all. That happens. I'm not going to act like it doesn't. And so it's always a business decision. But you have, I'm an attorney. I'm not, obviously I'm going to tell you to read the contract. I can't say, I can't undo that many years of practice and say, no, it's fine to sign. You want to just be aware of what rights you're getting. And here's a tip too. Whenever you're signing a contract, if something is in bold and all caps, then you are giving away a right that you inherently had, because they have to make it clear as day legally to enforce it, that you are giving up a right. That's why sometimes you'll see in a warranty or guarantee, it'll be all bold in caps. Pay attention, especially read the whole contract, ideally, but definitely pay attention to those sections, because you have a right that you are giving up. So you need to know when you read that, like, that's a big red flag on, okay, they're changing dynamics in this contract agreement, because they can't, because you can have a legal right to one thing, and then you can contractually agree that you're waiving that right. And that's that language that's doing it. But again, if I had a nickel for every time a project manager came to me, or like, well, they said they wouldn't change anything. I'm like, that's adorable. Of course they will, let's talk to them. And sometimes, if you have the luxury of having a legal department, sometimes that's great to be able to do, because, let them be the bad cop. There's very much a good cop, bad cop thing you can do. So if you can throw legal under the bus and you're like, well, they wouldn't let me do it, or you got to talk to legal, sometimes that will be enough to kind of get things moving. So use them as a resource. And if you aren't getting the proper response from them, start negotiating, managing up, talking to other people in the organization, saying, hey, listen, I need quicker responses on these agreements, or I need more support here, because they were working for you. I'm a big advocate of in-house legal departments. They are serving you. Like, they should not be running the company. They are a resource and not a roadblock. And so that was my whole standard when I was running the legal department, is like, be a resource, not a roadblock. Because as soon as someone sees a legal department and thinks, oh, they're just going to kill the deal, they'll just start signing things left and right. And then our liability goes up, because we haven't seen things. And there's certainly, you've seen this as well. There's things in contracts that look completely benign on their face. Like, you'd read that, you're like, yeah, that seems okay. But legally, it has a completely different meaning, and you can completely change the details of a deal that you're making if you don't have that, that insight, the legal insight on there.
Yeah, no, definitely. I've seen, especially with the era where we in our phones these days, right? You install so many apps. Every time you sign something, install app, you're giving away your privacy, right? You give a little bit every time, right? and how far do you gonna go? So yeah, we don't read those what's in a dotted line, but that's a good tip what you mentioned, that if something in the capitalized, you definitely want to pay attention to it. But you giving it's a, people think it's a free, yeah, it's a free, but you're giving away your privacy, your information slowly every time you install another app, right?
Yeah, exactly. And listen, I'm not gonna act like I'm reading those terms and conditions either. I'm checking yes on those apps too. But I will look for the highlight, the caps thing. But I think the best advice I have on that is, like, if you don't know like what the product is, or like who's making money, like, it's you. Like, they're making money off you, because your privacy, it's what you've given
your
up.
information. Yeah.
Your information. Yeah. If it's not very clear what you're getting, it's you.
Yeah. Okay. Good. So let's talk about your journey, Lynn. How did you were running a legal firm, for many years. So what inspired you? How did you change the direction? I don't see a lot of people in the field that change it to as a consultant, and they're trying to help people understand this legal area. So how did you make the change? If you talk about your background, how do you get into?
Yeah, well, I was lucky enough to be one of those people that grew up in an environment where people were negotiating. My dad was a great negotiator, but he did it in such a way that it was very endearing. Like, people wanted to work with him because he was being, relatable, and he was being ready, and it was in a very very kind way. It wasn't ever confrontational. And I started noticing other people around me would have a more aggressive approach. And listen, there is a time to be aggressive. I'm not saying there's not. There definitely is, and we can talk about that later. But I started noticing that my dad was getting a lot more results than other people that were getting more aggressive and kind of putting people down, or being, kind of awful to work with. They weren't getting as many results. And so I kind of learned that. And I always liked the idea of it. Really, I view negotiation as kind of a self-advocacy, kind of a self-care kind of thing, because if there's something that you want, you should be able to ask for it. And not be afraid of that. And again, not to be unreasonable or, crazy ass, but, if there's something you want, you should be able to advocate for it. So, when I was in law school, ended up going, I've always been in-house counsel. I've never been in a courtroom. I always joke that if I'm in a courtroom, like, I've done something wrong. I've always been in business and working with businesses. And so I've had the volume of just such a variety of negotiations. It's been really, really cool to see. I mean, from telecommunications in the 90s, when it's like, it was just going bonkers, and there was, you were like, I spent time working for Sprint, and that was very much the 800-pound gorilla. It's like, sign it or don't, we'll go find. And it was very successful. It's also incredibly boring, because you didn't get to negotiate a lot, because it's like, we're Sprint, sign it. What else are you going to do? But then when I was working for the engineering firm, is geotechnical, materials testing, environmental. So on a big construction project, they're low man. Like, there's not a lot of pull a lot of the time. And yet we're still negotiating. We're still getting these. So it was negotiating from a position of lesser leverage, but yet we were getting success because we were making the ask. And I just like that concept of, leverage is a thing. I'm not going to act like it's not. It definitely is a thing, but it shouldn't ever prevent you from making the ask, because you're never going to know if it's yes or no until you make that ask. I love my time with Terracon. It was great. And then we had a corporate relocation with my husband. So then when I relocated, I was thinking, okay, well, what am I going to do now? Yeah. And I was approached by the law school, said, hey, well, maybe you can come, teach here. And like, yeah, it was so flattering. But then I remember, like, I don't like law school. I don't like law students. And I'm like, well, what would I teach? And I thought, well, negotiation, that's the thing I know the most, and that have the most experience about. So I wrote the book, and then just started speaking, and it just kind of organically took off, so I can train people. And it's just so much fun. Like, I just love being able to empower people in a short time, to when they leave, again, that it's not a complex formula, and just to empower them and reassure them, like, it's going to be okay, but you got to go make the ask. And so the thing I like the most is getting feedback and emails like, oh my gosh, I just, I was negotiating for a car. I just did this, or, hey, this really worked. This is what I did. And I love hearing the wins.
Wow. Very interesting. Definitely, this is an area everybody needs a help, Peter. It's we generally don't ask, as you mentioned that we talk ourselves out of it, before we even ask for it, we will talk ourselves out of the whole thing and then just wait for some magic to happen that somebody's going to give it to you, without even asking.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's what you just got to get out of your own head and just be aware that you're doing that, and again, there's some sort of, there's a lot of fear surrounding this topic. And again, I think it's because people, certainly at a certain level, they just assume like, oh, I should already know how to do this. And so then you're afraid to raise your hand and be like, I need a little help in this topic, because you're like, oh, I should already know that. Like, people at my level should know how to do this. But unless you've, spent time practicing, or if you've dedicated time, or if you've really been around good people that you can mimic, you might not have that skill. And I will say too, being around bad negotiators also helpful, right? Because you can see like, oh, that just
what not to do.
terribly. Yeah. Knowing what not to do, just helpful. So if you're in a situation where you're around terrible people at it, just learn, pay attention to what's around you. But again, I think when you come at it knowing that I want to get better, this is skill set that I want to do better at, when you start your day and you start looking for things where you can make the ask, they come at you left and right.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, every little things help, right? So, you just gotta, coming from what position are you coming from? Are you coming from position of power? Are you coming from a little bit of leverage? And, as you mentioned, that helps a lot. But what you mentioned is, even without those things, you can still negotiate a better deal without even having that position or the leverage, right? You can still negotiate your way out.
Yeah, exactly. And there's one thing I'd used this last week, and it was exceptionally helpful. Sometimes you're going to be in a situation where it's very clear that your counterpart is in the wrong. Like, there's no question they messed up, and that you have to come to them and you have to figure out a solution. So there are a couple ways you can do that. You can come at them and you can go the howler monkey, the popular term, to go Karen, and just be really aggressive. And what that does is it closes them in. They feel like they're being attacked. They aren't going to be creative and being reasonable in terms of a solution, because they're going to it's a turnoff, right? When people come at you like that. So and again, this is only when 100% that it's very clear they did something wrong. So what I do is I make sure I'm unemotional about it. Like, if I need to calm down for a day or so, bring that temperature down, that's good, because you want to come at them very calmly, state the facts. And then this is the phrase I've used, and again, it's been remarkably helpful, is that say, I'm going to give you the opportunity to make this right? Because that automatically implies like it's in your court, you're in charge, you get to come up with a solution. There is going to be a solution, and so then they start thinking, okay, what can I do? What can I do? Not versus like, stop, like I don't want to do anything with you. So it gets them in that mindset of, okay, I have a way out here. What can I do to make this better? And it's remarkably successful when you come at it that way.
Wow, that's such an insight, great insight. So you're not closing in communication. You keep communication open. You just pass it on to other parties. So listen, what can you do to make it work, right? So you simply just passing it on, instead of you taking all the work on yourself. You're simply saying, you can make it work.
Yeah, exactly. I think I gave an example in my book with my dog. I believe, that there was something that he was at a doggy daycare, and something catastrophe. It was really wrong, and it was their fault. It wasn't another dog. Like, it was their procedures weren't followed, whatever. And it took me a good couple days to bring my temperature down, because I was so mad about it. But when I went in and said, hey, this is what happened, and I'm going to give you the opportunity to make it right, the response that you get is like, they're very thankful. Like, I literally did this last week. It was our 25th wedding anniversary. My husband and I were on a trip.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you. I have some serious food allergies, like EpiPen level, like not just I break out, but like dangerous, and this resort happened to label all their food, which was great, like in this buffet area, and they would label it, what they had or didn't have. And there was one I looked at, I'm like, that's definitely, so dairy is my EpiPen. And so that's definitely cheese. So I asked them about it, and they're like, oh yeah, we're sorry, we'll change it. I'm like, all right, one time, things happen, whatever. Fast forward, and I think it was a day and a half, I was there again, and the same thing happened. I'm like, okay, if you're going to label it, like, that's really serious, And so I met with them, they're like, oh, sorry. Yeah, we oopsie. And I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, that's not cool. Like the second time, that's not cool. So I went and talked to the front office because I'm sure, they don't know. And I was like, as a manager, I'm sure, and you've been in the situation, you can't manage what you don't know. So I was like, appreciate when people let me know. So I went to them like very calmly, said, hey, here's what happened. I wanted to give you the opportunity to make this right because here's what happened. And she was so thankful that I came to her in a calm manner and that I was bringing that approach. Fast forward, she's like, okay, well, we'll get a note in your room later today on what we're going to do. I came back later in the day, had a gift basket with all sorts of stuff from the gift shop. And then they credited one day of our stay. So I'm like, all right, cool, we're fine, but it was that I don't think that result would have been the same had I come in there guns blazing, I can't believe you did this, emotional, over the top, attacking. You're not setting them in a position to say yes or to get creative to find a solution.
Yeah, that's that's very hard to build a skill set though. We all get emotional. When your emotions are high, your communication gets muddy. It doesn't come out very right. And that's how people cut out the communication because you're not saying it, or even though your intentions are there, but it's not coming out as it should be coming out, right? So I think the emotion is the one blurry, the communication, and also how your body, how you're responding to a lot of things, right? And I think that's a very critical piece, that you got to keep your emotions down, and it provides you clarity that can go back at it instead of you being just so reactive to it. And that's what people I find cut off the communication. It's just not clear to them what you're asking for. Your intentions are not clear, and you're going at it.
Yeah, if you just come in and complain, or if I came in there and just was emotional and like, how could you do this? Well, what are they going to say? Like they screwed up. They know they screwed up. Like that's just not putting them in a position to respond appropriately. But in terms of emotions, and I wrote this in my book, but one of the favorite filters that I use, it was my husband was in the Army, so he's now retired General Bowles. Use this as a filter. I've been using this for 27 years now, but and that is, if it feels good to say it, don't. If it feels good to say it, don't, because if it's going to feel good, like if you said something, I know you contradicted yourself, or you said something later, I know that's a lie, and I just want to immediately, like, it's going to feel so good to say this and to take you down a peg. That's my again, my mental check to be like, well, hold on. Do I really want to say this? Because if it's going to feel good, you're definitely pulling from a well of emotion. You're not thinking it through. So you've got to be intentional with using your emotions on whether you're going to show them or not. And again, a lot of times it is necessary. You want to show emotion, like, this is serious. Like, I want you to know that this is upsetting to me. I want you to know that I'm angry about this, but it's being intentional about that, not reactive. And again, if it feels good to say it, don't, because I'm not saying you don't address it at all, but you can address it when your temperature comes down and you can be more clear and more communication around that subject. Because if it's going to feel good, it's very rarely have I done that and it's worked out in the long run.
Yeah, I'm gonna make a note of that. That's such a good insight, that if it feels good, if it feels good to you, it may not feel good to other people, right? So
it definitely will not. If it's going to feel good to you, I can guarantee it's not going to feel good to the other person.
Okay, good stuff. No, that's definitely a great insight. I'm gonna make a note of that, because I'm guilty of that. Sometimes you want to say it simply, especially with your staff. Sometimes who you're dealing with, you just want to get it out. But don't get it out because it feels good to you, but not to other people.
Right. Or get it out to someone that's not, that doesn't have a horse in this race. If you call your spouse or call someone else, call a friend and be like, oh, I just need to vent, right? Sometimes you just need to vent. I'm not saying you don't, but not to the person that it's going to impact the most, because when you approach them, there's just a lot more authority comes with the fact, if you're addressing someone and there's an issue and you're not howler monkey crazy with them, if you can create first of all, it's way more professional. And again, it's going to create an environment where they're going to be more reasonable, like, and to find a solution, versus if you come at them very dramatic, very emotional. It's just human nature to feel attacked and closed off, and you're not going to think clearly because you're just in reactive mode. You're not in problem solving mode. And so if you're negotiating, you want people to stay in problem solving mode.
Mm-hmm. But emotion could be used positive to negotiate as well, right? Every time I deal with my kids or deal with my dog, they know how to emotionally negotiate. We always give into that as well, right? So So negotiating with emotions it's not such a bad thing. You can get your way out. Look at your kids and dogs, or pets. They get their way out every time.
Well, first of all, kids are great negotiators because they do not have that internal dialogue where they shut themselves down, right? They are asking every time. There's no hamper on them asking, right? They'll ask 10, 20 times. Like, they are not afraid to ask. So they do great when they're negotiating, But yeah, no, there definitely is a role for emotion. I just want people to be intentional about it and not reactive with it. But if I'm working with someone, and even that example, the resort, like on the second time when I was working with people, I'm like, yeah, I showed a little bit more emotion because I wanted them to understand, like, this isn't, I'm trying to lose weight for the new year. I'm like, this is EpiPen level, so I was like a little more animated to let them understand, like, this isn't just, this is a big deal. Like, this is for it can be life or death. I've been in the emergency room, like, it is a big deal. So I'm going to show a little bit more emotion, but that was intentional. That wasn't it's going to feel good and I'm going to freak out. I was like, I need you to understand that this is a big deal. Sometimes, showing that emotion just hammers home the point, which you want to do. But again, it's doing it intentionally, not just reactively.
There's so much to learn in this area, that you can go and it's a journey, as we mentioned. Building a skill set takes time. First of all, starting the journey is important. Then definitely keep working at it, keep sharpening your skill set, getting better at it. I think it's an ongoing battle that you just have to go through and learn from.
And it does get better. It might be incredibly awkward at first, but I promise, like, the more you do it, the more you make the ask, and the more you're honoring that don't ask, don't get philosophy, it gets easier and easier and easier. And like, it doesn't, I don't second guess at all. Like, if I'm around something, I'm like, oh, I wonder if they do that. And like, I'm very comfortable. I just go do it because I do it all the time, and so if they say no, they say no, but at least then I tried, I checked, and it's fun, even if you're checking into a hotel, in that environment. Sometimes I think it's very helpful too, that you recognize and you tell people, like, you don't have to do this. Like, I know you don't have to do this. Sometimes when people understand, like, I'm not demanding, I understand that you don't have to do this, but if you could help me out,
how could you?
Could you, because people do like to help people, it's just kind of most of the time, unless you hate your job and you're disgruntled and you don't want to do it. Yeah, you're never going to win that one, but at least you asked, but if you say, hey, I know you don't have to do this, but do you happen to have any upgrades available? I just thought I'd ask, if you just very disarming, you'd be surprised how often that works, because when you're recognizing, like, you don't have to do this, but I'm just going to ask you, and it can be very effective.
Yeah, and business leaders, a business owner running their companies, you got to stay on top of this skill set, right? You got to build a skill set. If you have a staff who's in a much better skill set, it's be very difficult for you to manage it, right? So you're going to feel that stress because they are a little much more mature in the skill set they develop compared to where you at. So business leaders, they have to sharpen their skill set, just to make sure that you manage people effectively and you're not put on a spot where they are much ahead of you building the skill set that you are.
Yeah. Managing people, it's another form of negotiation. Negotiation really is just about influence. It's influencing the other party to, to agree with you or to head in the direction that you want. And the same thing is with management, you can manage your people in an aggressive, confrontational way, or you can be collaborative and you can coach them and you can try to get them there. Like, which do you think is going to be more successful in the long run? What attitude, if you take, is going to require you to hire a lot more people because people are quitting, It's the same with negotiation. Like, if you come at it initially, if you approach it like, hey, let's find an agreement. Let's find the common ground. Now, if someone counters that, and if they come at it with a very aggressive tone, aggressive technique, right, you got to pivot. This works until it doesn't, in terms of, trying to be collaborative. And if they're coming at you aggressively, you got to be able to pivot. And then you need to, be, more clear on what you're wanting, be a little bit more aggressive in what you're doing. I always say, like, it's best to stay like one tick below them in terms of emotion and aggressiveness. Gotcha. You got to pass the CEO test, right? Yeah. If your CEO, if it was in writing, if it was an email, or if they just heard about something, are they going to be proud of what you said? Are they going to be indifferent, or are you going to get fired? Right. You want to make sure you're staying within those parameters, but I don't ever want anyone to be a doormat. So again, I say you start with the the mindset that we're going to work together, we're going to find something. But if your counterpart is not having it, if they're getting more aggressive, then again, that's actually the second R, that's being more relatable, because they're telling you, I don't want to monkey around. I don't want to have small talk. I don't want to do this. I want to get right to it. Okay, cool. I'm going to adjust that. So I'm going to, cater more to your demeanor there. And then that actually is helpful for them, because like, okay, good. Like they got it. He got it. He understands where I'm coming from. Yeah.
Very interesting. Yeah, definitely. There's so much the area to build your skills and learn from this. So where can people get a little bit more help? Definitely, I'm going to recommend your book. I learned so much from your book. Get a copy of your book, go through it, and how can they reach out to you, Lynn, if they need? Everybody needs more help. This is not expertise that most business owners have or business leaders have in house, so they got to reach out to somebody like you to get some expertise. So how can they go about get some more help when they need help or to build their teams or build their businesses?
Sure. Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn. It's Lynn Price at LinkedIn, or my website is lynnpriceconsulting.com. And so I work a lot with companies to work with them, like to do a presentation, on the basis of the book and the formula 3 R's, and how to overcome fear and some common misunderstandings, that you can get out of the way so then you can get right to it. And one thing that I like to do too, when I'm working with companies, I do quite a bit, is that I work with them in advance to understand their business, and then kind of come up with the common things that they're negotiating the most. And then I create scenarios, like a half-page scenario. So then we break into small groups, and then they have to put it to work, because like once you apply it, that's when you get a little more confident, because you see how it works. And then I provide feedback on on their strategy and on what I think would work and not. And so when you can see it, like how it's going to apply to your day-to-day life, that's where the real value comes in, because I don't want people to, I don't want to speak to a group and like, oh yeah, that's great information. They leave and they never put it into practice. Like that's a loss for me. Like I want people to go out and be empowered and to see this as an opportunity, to just reframe the whole topic. If it's intimidating to you, to really look at it as an opportunity to be a self-advocate, to advocate on that, even if it's, on behalf of your company, you're still a part of that company. So you want to advocate for it. And it's an empowering feeling, and it can really give you a lot of confidence. And again, when you have confidence in negotiation, that's really the superpower. So it's getting people to that, but I'm easy to find.
No, I'm going to include all the links to your website and your LinkedIn profile just below the video as well. When you're going through the exercise, like you just mentioned, that definitely it's a form of preparation as well, right? You're preparing yourself before you even get into situations, so beforehand what are you getting into and how to handle that situation when you get there.
Right. And I guarantee if I sat down with you right now, if I said, like, what are the top 3 areas that you're negotiating in your job today, you would have no trouble coming up with those 3 topics.
Yeah.
Right. So if you already know those, then you can prepare for them, and you can have standards that you're going to use every time this comes up. So you can be prepared for something, even if you don't know when it's coming at you. You could pick up the phone and you're like, oh, okay, I already know how I'm going to react to this because I've given it some thought. It's when you pick up that phone call and you haven't given it much thought where you're going to kind of stumble and fumble around. But if you've given you've gone through that first R of being ready and given preparation phase, you're going to be much more successful.
Yeah, definitely. I think preparation is a big element into all of those. Where can people find your book? It's on Amazon, I take it?
It's on Amazon. Yeah, that's probably
where I find it.
Or if you contact me directly, I can send one out. But yeah, Amazon's probably the easiest.
Good stuff. I want to acknowledge you for your time. Thank you so much for time. I learned so much from our discussion. I'll definitely encourage all business leaders to business owners who are watching, go get a copy of the book and reach out to you for conversation. I learned so much from our discussion. I'm sure everybody who reaches out, they're going to learn so much from your discussion. So, I'll encourage you to get a copy of the book and reach out to you and connect with you on a LinkedIn, on a social media, and see what difference that makes in a business.
Yeah, that sounds great. Thank you so much for your time. I enjoyed it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay.